His Excellency is no stranger to our industry, having moderated several televised leaders' debates, most notably the federal elections of 1979 and 1984. As well, both in Canada and south of the border, he has moderated 2 public affairs programs, The Editors and The World in Review, throughout the 1990s. Joining His Excellency today on stage and facilitating the discussion is CTV News Ottawa anchor Graham Richardson. A long-standing member of the Bell Media team, Graham has more than 17 years of experience in broadcast journalism from across the country and internationally. The final session for today is designed to explore the role of Canadian film and television in our culture and our economy, as well as its place as a major Canadian export to the world and the role of innovation in all of this. The conversation will be followed by a question and answer period where His Excellency can address your questions. Je voudrais maintenant inviter Son Excellence, le très honorable David Johnston, sur la scène.
Which chair do you want, Graham?
Sure. Well, it's up to you, sir.
Yeah.
You think you could have called someone? There's a gold medal game on. Didn't they know primetime Ottawa was on?
It's 2-2. 2-2. Did you get the score? We were down 1-0 at the end of the first period, 16 minutes into the second period. Down 2-0 and scored 2 goals, Nick, in the last 4 minutes to tie it up 2-2. What do we have? 30 seconds to go. We're in overtime now. And that's 20 minutes, sudden death. And at the end of the first overtime, they go shootout. I think that's it. It's not 5 minutes sudden death overtime. I think it's 20 minutes. So we'll get the score, Graham, as we go along, huh?
With your hockey history, and you're a great fan and a former player, still play, right?
100 years ago.
So you're all permitted to interrupt us if we're having a conversation and whoever wins, but particularly if the red team scores.
Oh my. And you know, this is so important. The best athletic contests I've watched in the last 25 years have been the Canada-U.S. women's playing in these tremendously engaged matches. And they play the game. They play the game the way I love to see it play. It's skill, it's speed, it's teamwork. The violence that is such an unattractive part of the professional game is just out of it. And my, is it wonderful to watch. So we want to catch this one.
And we all love the NHL, as I do. But there is something about the amateur experience. And you know this is the pinnacle. And today, those young women on both teams, they will never forget this, and everyone is watching, except for people in this room, and we're going to talk about innovation.
And here's a prediction. When we win the gold medal today, it'll be Hayley Wickenheiser's 4th gold medal? Yes, she'll score the winner.
You're going with Wickenheiser. This is great. Thank you, first of all, for taking time out of a very busy schedule. His Excellency is heading to India tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
And you're going to experience Bollywood, and the reason I raised that, and it's connected to what's happening out there. The people who have slipped out to go gather around a television and see a great Canadian story. Talk to us a bit about, through the previous conversation, we talked a lot about, or we heard a lot about the shifting, changing nature of our consumption as readers, as viewers, as Canadians. The role that innovation plays, because I know it's an important part of what you like to talk about regularly.
Let me speak, first of all, Graham, about the specific and then the very general. The specific is, there's a great Canadian story with respect to what we're watching today, the televised Olympics. And what drama, what great storytelling, what great suspense, huh? It was Dick Pound, vice chairman of the Canadian Olympic Committee in 1984. I'm not sure he was vice chairman then, but he brought television to the Los Angeles Games. And it took on a whole different echelon of professionalism and made these great stories available to the whole world at relatively low cost. That was Dick Pound, Canadian from Montreal, who's done so much else for the Olympic movement. That's a specific one. The general one about innovation, particularly innovation in communication, is my favorite century, I think, is the 16th century in Western Europe. And I tell a story of John, Marty, and Fred. Well, who was John? John was Johannes Gutenberg, who, quote, invented the printing press, movable type, about 1450 in Amsterdam as a jeweler, and he went bankrupt twice. His technological innovation got nowhere. Along comes Martin Luther, who in 1522 nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wurtemberg and translated the Bible from the original Greek and Hebrew, not the Latin derivative, into German, the vernacular, the language that people understood. Fred, more obscure figure. Luther would not have been able to do that work, to translate the Bible, if Frederick the Elector of Saxony had not protected him for a year in his castle from the constraints of the Catholic Church. We would not have had the Protestant Revolution. So you needed the ecological environment, the protective environment that Fred provided, for the social revolution that Martin developed, to have the technology of Johannes Gutenberg develop a new way of learning, which was learning by reading. And a couple of points. One is it took all three together because Asia, the Chinese civilization, had the printing press at least 1,000 years before. We believe it started in Korea. In fact, Marco Polo saw a printing press and printing in Beijing when he was there in 1280, 1290. So they had the Johns, they had the technology, but they didn't have the social revolution, and they didn't have that environment for these new ideas to develop. And Western Europe, thanks to the printing press, came from a backward, dark age civilization well behind China, India, and Islam into the forefront. Because what happened there is the most important thing in people's lives in the Middle Ages was their relationship with God. But that had been transferred to them through a very hierarchical arrangement of priests and bishops and cardinals and popes, intermediaries, and awesome cathedrals, etc., where they learned by obedience. And it was fear of God and going to hell that kept you in your particular status situation. But it was the liberation of learning about that relationship with God that developed, first of all, the breakdown of feudalism, the rise of the cities, the Industrial Revolution, democracy, and Western Europe advancing. Fast forward, we're in that situation today, except that this new communication revolution, which we're living through, is so much faster than the printing press. It took 3 centuries for the printing press to reach a majority of the population of Western Europe. How long do you think it's taken the internet to reach a majority of the population of the world? A decade. And that is the environment of innovation in which we're working. But it also, the lessons I draw is one, it takes a combination, a coalition of forces coming together, each reinforcing the other, and it takes a particular need. In the 15th and 16th century, it was one's relationship with God. And I suppose today, I hope there's some of that still with us, but also this enormous thirst for knowledge. Each of us wants our children in any corner of the world to be able to have that kind of knowledge that they can have a degree of freedom in their own lives and build better communities.
And on paper, you look at what you've just said, and some might not buy what you're selling. Come on, there's no connection. There is a connection. Egypt, and cell phones, and Twitter, and video moving on our hips or in our pockets at lightning speed that's changing how we're watching and consuming the gold medal game today. It's also changing. It can move governments. It can remove governments. Look at Ukraine, what's happening today.
Or North and South Korea.
Or North and South Korea.
You know, we've seen in 50 years a peninsula that was sort of a homogenous people, divided in 1949, war ended in 1952, some degree of technology, at least in producing missiles and atomic bombs in North Korea, but no Protestant revolution, no Martin and no Freds. And South Korea, on the other hand, a more inclusive entrepreneurial society going rockets ahead, coming out of that poverty and now being a very successful developed country.
People in this room are grappling with how do I get, we keep saying content, how do I get I like to say stories because I'm in local news and we're all telling stories. How do we leverage the technology and the innovation you've been talking about to reach more people? And whether it's people, again, I come back to hockey, people are gathered physically on their phones right now around televisions around the country, and we're all striving for that, whether it's great shows, whether it's Lisa LaFlamme, CTV National News at Night, whether it's my 6 o'clock program, our 6 o'clock program. How does this room, do you think, learn from the lessons way back hundreds of years ago and leverage this new technology to reach as many people, in your view, as possible?
Well, Graham, these are very broad answers, and we can get more specific if you want, but I'd say a couple of things that are part of a great Canadian tradition. One of the really attractive features of our country is how we have dealt with diversity and inclusiveness. We've really had to struggle with bringing together different interests, different cultures. Early on, 2 languages, 2, quote, religions, 2 systems of law, which somehow we found the accommodation to make work. Today, the country in the world that is most welcoming to immigrants, both in number and how they settle, et cetera. And so that willingness to have many voices and have those voices sing or speak, et cetera, has been an important part of our tradition, and somehow finding the ways of accommodation that allow those voices not to be suppressed, but to develop their own form of creativity. That'd be point one. The second, I would say, is a success in a public education system. And it's an education system where we have tried to take those 2 objectives of excellence and equality of opportunity and make them mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. We have built excellence in our educational system, have ways to go in some areas, but we are the most accessible nation in the world in terms of opportunity to study.
Still.
Yes, in our primary and secondary system, we also have excellence. We are the leading English-speaking country in terms of the OECD PISA tests. Now, Finland, South Korea, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, in fact, are ahead of us, but functioning in other languages. That's a great tribute to a public education system, and we have the highest accessibility rates in our post-secondary system, colleges and universities. And so what we've done is we have been able to say we will try to make these systems as accessible as possible to a broad range of talent. And out of that breadth, then, one creates the diversity, the collaboration, the competition from which comes excellence. But there's always a dark cloud sometimes, even on a sunny day. There's an OECD study that I often quote that takes the educational attainment of children as against their parents, and it ranks 32 countries in how well you do on that improvement. And it divides the population into quintiles, 20% each. Canada is number 1 in the top 4 quintiles. So in 80% of our population, children exceed their parents' level of education at a greater rate than any other country in the OECD. So you think, well, the bottom 20%'s got to be pretty good, huh? Rising tide raises all boats. We're in the bottom third. So that's the challenge, that we have equality of opportunity for a large segment of our population. We have ways to go, and so that's a constant lesson. How does this play into your question?
Let me stop. So if I understand this correctly, the bottom, when you said the bottom third, what do you mean?
Bottom 20.
Bottom
20%
of
parents
yes.
find that their children essentially do not exceed their level of education in Canada, whereas the other 80% do, and do by a larger measure than any other OECD country.
What do you think that says?
I think it says that the glass is half full and that we've come a long way in achieving this marriage of equality of opportunity and excellence through a reasonably affordable public education system. But as in all things where you're striving for very good or perfection, we have a long ways to go, and we have some pockets that are really challenging, such as Aboriginal and First Nation education. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean in terms of innovation? Well, it means that what you want to do in a society is to liberate the creative genius of all of our people, especially our young people. And I believe that the public education system has a very key role to do in that, and that we're doing well, but we have to do better.
You were talking earlier at the table about practical work experience for our young people. I'll come back to that in a second. But in the earlier panel, we heard about a tightness, or not a shortage, but just Canada's smaller. I'm paraphrasing essentially what we were talking about when we were talking about writers. How do you overcome that? The fact that we're next to the elephant and still create excellence like you talk about, and still create wonderful lives for our young people in this industry and in others? Number one,
I think it's interesting, dare I say, complimentary, dare I say, remarkable that we've lived so well beside the elephant, and that continues to be our most important domestic challenge, perhaps save Indian and Aboriginal First Nations education, and also our most important foreign policy objective, to continue to ensure that that relationship is a positive and strengthening one. We have maintained our independence as a nation, including culturally, and some of the measures, some of the balances, some of the frameworks that were spoken of in the panel earlier and are present in this room are part of finding that way of being sure that the Canadian identity is certain, is creative, and continue to flourish. And I guess the other thing I would say is how important it is for us to be global. Not only to learn how to tell our own stories and to be sure that they're Canadian stories, not just North American stories or largely American stories, but to see the whole world as our stage and to play on that stage. So I'm off to India tomorrow, and the theme of that mission, this will be the 33rd country that I visited as Governor General. The theme will be education, innovation, entrepreneurship, and we usually add trade to that. Just came back from China and Mongolia, similar kinds of missions. We do have a good educational system. We get so much advantage from the movement of our young people out and the movement of other young people in terms of enhancing the knowledge of them and enhancing the knowledge of our culture and others. The best thing I think we can do to promote Canadian culture abroad is to be as international as we possibly can in our education system.
This is not on my list of questions. You're a busy man. What do you watch?
Well, I watch the Olympics incessantly.
You're watching the Olympics?
Yeah. I watch the news with a great deal more interest than I used to. I guess I've always been interested, but I've become quite intrigued by news, and I yearn actually for more international news. I'm anxious that we see the world through the television programs.
And there are connections in this room to international. You talk about the travel you do. You talk about are Canadians shirking that notion that we are smaller, particularly in this industry and the successes that we've heard about. How important do you think that is to broaden out? And to be innovative, but also to be world leaders, do you think?
Well, number one, Graham, I think by our nature, we are understated people. And there are pluses and minuses in that. I guess the minuses are that you don't blow your trumpet quite as well as you should. And there are times when those trumpets make great music. I guess the pluses is that that's an attractive feature of Canadians, that we tend to function well with difference and in different cultures. And we don't insist that ours is the only way or the right way, that we have the humility to learn from others. I think during my lifetime, there's been a very interesting transition. I grew up in a little town in northern Ontario, and I through happenstance, had a chance to go to a university, which I love, Harvard. And my high school principal would not write the letter of recommendation that I needed to go there, because he said, American universities are second class. And he was a good man. This was not a bad person, dedicated to his craft. But small northern Ontario town, you're always losing talent. One more good kid goes south, won't come back. I said, well, you know, with respect, there's some first class and second class and third class institutions in the US, and I think this is a good one. But he wouldn't write the letter. The football coach and the history teacher did, and he said, you're a big frog in a really small pond. You got to go and get your head knocked off on the football field by people who are faster, tougher than you. Same thing in the classroom. That's changed in my lifetime. My 5 daughters have studied in 12 different countries, experienced exchanges, volunteer efforts in about 30 different countries. So I think my children's generation are looking at the world and being global citizens. I think Vancouver 2010 was a wonderful hinge point in Canada, because the Olympics were the Canadian Olympics. The preparation for it was nationwide. We had a wonderful cadre of volunteers who made it work. It was carried off beautifully in Vancouver. And guess what? We won 14 gold medals.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, from that, we say we're gold medal people, we're not bronze medal people. Earlier, Tom mentioned Alice Munro's Nobel Prize in literature. Only the second time a Nobel Prize has been won for short stories. Isn't it interesting that we have an artist who for 50 years has been the leading craftsperson of short stories in the world? And you know, that's a wonderful opportunity for film, isn't it? Take Alice Munro's stories and film them.
And in getting ready for this Olympics, I watched on YouTube on my iPad with my Wi-Fi at home all the celebrations of the Crosby goal. I'm sorry if we're talking about hockey too much. Actually, I'm not sorry. And the sharing of that moment brought by innovation and technology, right? Brought by someone's innovation. And there was an image. If you go on YouTube and you search, you've got the Crosby celebrations, and there's one in particular as the goal is scored. There's a man in a turban in a crowd, and he's got Canadian maple leafs on his turban, and it's at the moment, and everybody is going nuts, no matter who they are, no matter where they are. And I share that because the reason I'm able to consume it in my home on my iPad is because of technology that is not very old. It's not very old.
And we're just scratching the surface, you know?
Yeah.
3 centuries for the printing press in Western Europe, 1 decade for the internet. We're just at the beginning of that wave. And the most important thing about nation states today is not the size of their GDP or how large an armada they can put together or how many horsemen in stirrups, but it's how well they develop the talent of all of their people in their society and how well then they use that knowledge to improve the human condition. 1, it's enhanced by sharing, and number 2, this new technology that we have makes it available almost at no cost in every corner of the globe. It's a wonderful time to be alive, to be able to take advantage of this distribution of knowledge to improve the human condition. I want to comment on Crosby's goal. Jerome McGinley set it up.
He started it.
He was in the corner.
Yes.
He won a battle. He was on his hands and knees. He didn't know where Crosby was by sight, but he knew in the back of his head where he was, and he flipped that pass out. Crosby was not looking at the net. He had an image of the net in his head, and there was a shot along the ice that went in the corner. Wonderful, wonderful feature of that game of teamwork, of intuition, and of having a memory of where things are and hitting the right spot.
He also yelled Iggy, and I've seen a split-second play-by-play deconstruction of the goal. So anyway, we'll see how the women are doing. We haven't heard.
Any word, Nick?
Still in overtime.
What are we, about 15 minutes on?
We have a penalty.
Oh, gee.
The Americans are on a power play. Can you just talk about? And we've had some discussions, and I think it's wonderful. The industry, generally speaking, I think has matured beyond just discussions about what is Canadian content and what is a Canadian story and why is that important. But you know, at the same time, do you have views on how we tell our stories and how we project them to the world?
Sure. In fact, I had the wonderful opportunity when in the 80s to chair the Information Highway Advisory Council. It's the best public policy thing I've done, and I've done about 25 of these things. And what happened was, it was John Manley, the Minister of Industry, and Mr. Chrétien was the Prime Minister, and they were both sold on this important new disruptive technology and getting a Canada lead. So much so that we produced a report with, I think, 230 different recommendations, and I was making a presentation of that at my beloved Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and they said, that's crazy, 230 recommendations? You know, you'll be lucky if you have 12 to get 5 adopted. But what we were trying to do was not develop a map, but kind of a broad blueprint, and it was very important leadership by the minister. The deputy minister was Kevin Lynch at that time, who spearheaded things, and a great working relationship between 25 people from the creative industries, from the industrial side, et cetera, working together as competition was being introduced and being able to find the ways beyond the turf battles that inevitably occurred. That was a high water point for me. And we were wrestling with this business, of course, of how you protect Canadian content. I guess the way I come down is I'm very much a free trader in terms of the carriage, the mechanism, et cetera. And I know they get blurred, and I'm rather more protective with respect to the content. And in the earlier discussions, I would say, what do we hear? No?
Somebody's just yelling. I shouldn't have encouraged interruption unless there's a goal. Sorry.
It's very important that we do pay attention to the content, to the creative feature, and that we use a wide variety of means to get at it. You know, beginning with remembering John and Marty and Fred, those mechanisms that create the environment. Secondly, trying to encourage as much diversity and creativity. Little kids always are asking why. That's curiosity that you don't want to constrain. Waterloo, where I was last before I came here, we developed a theme for our strategic framework for the few years I was there, and it came from George Bernard Shaw's lovely couplet of some people see things as they are. We dream of things that ought to be and ask why not. The first statement, some people see things how they are and wonder why, that's an appropriate statement for universities. It's always asking why. But the second one is the really attractive one. We dream. That's something about our imagination, what we see down there, of things that ought to be. That's a moral imperative, something we want to bring about and we're passionate about. And then this wonderful effervescent spirit, and why not? Why can't we do that? There are no boundaries. It's the courage of the innocent. So that's the kind of thing that really appeals to me when I think of content and this little nation, Canada, punching above its weight on the world stage.
I believe we've got a few microphones. If there are questions in the audience, I think we've got some folks carrying microphones. Yeah, and do we have a question there? Yeah.
We do. Hi there. Hi, my name is Jack Bloom. I run Real Canada, which brings festivals of Canadian film into high schools and to new Canadians across the country. And what we see on the front line is that young people, there's a terrible disconnect, and there's very, very little awareness of Canadian culture, Canadian storytelling, Canadian film and television. So I wondered if you'd talk about, from your point of view, the relationship between the film and television industry and the future of this country, particularly with regards to youth.
Well, 2 points I'd say. Number one, it's the new medium, it's a new form of communication. And Canadians have demonstrated a good deal of adeptness in developing the new medium. We've had communication challenges throughout our history. We developed some of the great scholars of communication. Think of Harold Innis, think of Marshall McLuhan, think of Northrop Frye in literature, etc. So we should be able to use this new medium to develop the enthusiasm and the appreciation of the next generation of Canadians. The second thing I would say is that I'm a teacher, and for the first time in the history of teaching, the kids know more than the prof, or at least they have access to more data and maybe even information for the prof. And what a wonderful way to teach when you don't have to be a conveyor of facts, but what you have to be is a person who helps the critical thinking. And so the job of the teacher with the young, especially using these new tools, is to help to sharpen the questions so we sort out the wheat from the chaff. So we move from data to information to knowledge. We won? What do you got, Nick? Still 0-2-2? We won 3-2.
Hey!
We're going to sing "Oh Canada" right now. Come
All
on.
right.
Come on. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, patriot love in all our sons' command. Ton histoire est toute épopée, il fait triompher la croix.
There they are.
Ton histoire est toute épopée, des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Bravo! Who scored, Nick? Who scored? I bet it's Haley.
Yeah, what if it was
Hey,
Haley?
how about that? Bravo! Isn't that? Now that's content at its best, huh?
It is. What a great story.
Listen,
We'll
and
all
the-
remember where we were when, right?
And this morning, Jennifer Jones won the gold medal in women's curling.
The
in
golden
ninth
day.
inning.
The golden day. Where were you when the women won gold? I was with the Queen's representative. And he led the whole room in "Oh Canada" spontaneously. That's pretty darn good. Do we have another question? We have another question.
Your Excellency, I'm so moved that we all shared that together and that you led us in the anthem. That's so great. But I have a question for you, and that is, I understand that with the CMPA, you are organizing an event that celebrates Canadian feature film. I'm wondering if you can speak to that, please.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that lovely softball. Did you get the question? This young lady's mom and dad are great friends of ours. Her dad is a remarkable professor of mining engineering, led one of the great centers of excellence at McGill. Great, great Canadians, the two of them that have done so much to build this country. The question is, we're having a movie night at Rideau Hall in August. We'll have a French film and an English film selected by the CMPA. They're our partner, and there are 7 or 8 other partners. And why are we doing this? Well, because Rideau Hall is the home of the people of Canada. We want everyone to come to Rideau Hall and see that particular institution in our parliamentary democracy, but it should be as open as possible. And here's an opportunity for us to say at Rideau Hall, here's the best of Canadian film and television. Come and see it. It's in the evening. Bring your popcorn along. It'll be outdoors, and I hope that it'll be something we'll do annually. One of the features of this job that I have the privilege to hold is the Office of the Governor-General is to connect, to honor, and inspire Canadians, and to do that around our most fundamental values, including how we see ourselves, how we speak to our soul, how we tell our Canadian stories. So that's our effort with Rideau Hall Movie Night, August, English, French. It'll be just 2 films to start with, and any luck, we'll make it a whole summer festival. Thank you very much.
And we are getting close to time here, folks. And I just wanted to say, I want everybody to remember, if you ever hear about a stuffy Governor General, you don't have one. So I want to thank you very much for your time here. This has been fantastic, and what a Canadian moment. And I know we've got some Americans with us as well, and those 2 teams, it's okay, it's okay. We've got another gold medal game or semifinal coming up that I'm a little nervous about. But anyway, I wanted to thank everybody. And I know what my lead story is going to be tonight on CTV News at 6. Thank you very much.
Graham, just before we wrap up,
Yeah.
just let me say one thing. One of the things we started about 3 months ago was My Giving Moment, and it's on mygivingmoment.ca, and we're using social media, using this new set of technological tools to say to Canadians that each of us has it within ourselves to help our neighbor. Time, talent, money, big or small, old or young. And so we have a website, mygivingmoment.ca, and we encourage people to click on the website to share those stories, but then to be creators themselves, to put your own story on, because it will inspire others to people to say, hey, I can do that.
Fantastic.
So on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank His Excellency David Johnston for taking time to join us today with Graham Richardson. Going off script for a second, which I'm not allowed to do, I'd just like to say that I think you've made the day better for all of us by your being here. And I think you've instilled in us a spirit of feeling better about Canada and maybe being a little better able to understand what our challenges are and why we're striving to deliver Canadian content to people around the world, to tell our stories to people around the world.
Thank you.
So I thank you very much. And we're looking forward, obviously, to collaborating with Rideau Hall to create 2 very special events this summer. And I know I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the other partners in this. I know Bell and Telefilm and Cineplex and E1, and I know there are others, and Mark will mention them. And Mark Seguin, of course, thank you very much for pulling this all together in the first place. So now, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask, would you please rise for the departure of His Excellency, the Governor-General of Canada. Mesdames et Messieurs, voulez-vous se lever, s'il vous plaît, pour le départ de Son Excellence, le Gouverneur-Général du Canada.